tape recording on April 27, 1982, of a talk by Oliver Hamlin. The occasion is the annual Lafayette Historical Society's potluck dinner at the Veterans Hall.
Summarizing what we've done this year, I think we can point to 3 or 4 accomplishments. And the one that is at the top of the list for us is the publication of this book, which is The Improvers of Lafayette. This is a history of the Lafayette Improvement Association from 1911. It also chronicles, if you get into it, the history of the development of Lafayette in a detailed fashion. In other words, the transportation, the utilities, the political structure, all the things that go into making a community a viable community. And we're really pleased with the response we've had to this book. We have reached the point in the book where we are now at a break-even position. And any other books we sell go to make a positive contribution to the Historical Society. This, as you know, is our second recent effort in the publishing field. Both of these books are available this evening to purchase if you'd like. Andrew has autographed some of the copies that are here that you might be able to get. They're also on sale in the city at the camera shop and the bookshop, of course, the needlepoint shop, and at the Chamber of Commerce. And we appreciate what these people do for us all year by making these books available. Another thing that we did, and probably a lot of you enjoyed that with us, was last July the city had a 13th birthday party, and in connection with that we unveiled a marker to Elam Brown. And Elam Brown, as you know, is one of the founders of Lafayette, and Ray Peters. Well, excuse me, Ray. He and his wife are founders of Lafayette. That was pointed out to me before. Ray actually had a lot to do with making that happen, and if you are over in Lafayette Square, you'll see the marvelous monument that we have there. That was probably our most elaborate historical marker. We had 2 successful meetings this year. Both were jointly sponsored by the Friends of the Lafayette Library, which was a new twist for us, and I think they were both well received, both dealing with books. Jim Holliday's book on the Gold Rush, we had an author's preview party, and in Andrew Young's book also. I mentioned the newsletter. This is a way to communicate with the community and tell them of things that are happening from a historical perspective. The Wayside Inn restoration, as you know, the Wayside Inn is an official city landmark, and Ernie's nodding his head, yes, that's true. That means that when some work needs to be done on the exterior of the structure, the Historical Society has to issue what's called a Certificate of Appropriateness. Terrible, long, highfalutin name. That means that we have to approve what's done to the building. And we were able to work with the Assistants League this year and the architect to what I think that the building is a better representation of its historical meaning than it was before the unfortunate fire. So we were pleased that Ray was able to help us with that also. In summary, I think we can say that the Historical Society is very much alive in Lafayette. It's very much carrying out its obligation to instill in the people in the city and to foster a sense of historical appreciation for Lafayette. I'm pleased with that. I think that's possible because of the people that we have in the society, the people that do the work and make these things happen. One of the things that we like to do at these meetings especially is to hear from old-timers, and that is meant in a very positive and complimentary way. The old-timers are getting younger all the time, which probably is a reflection on me more than anything else. But I'd like to introduce Richard Johnson, who is our program chairman, who will introduce our speaker for the evening. Dick?
Before I introduce the speaker, I have a couple of things to say. One, in trying to sell the raffle tickets, we had one person who was very, very anxious to buy it. And Ray Peters was the only person who bought 5 tickets. Mildred, if you would like to sell it, I'm sure that you may have a likely seller or a likely buyer, and that is Ray Peters. So Mildred, we think that it's great that you won, but if you'd like to sell it, Ray is willing to buy it. He certainly has spent many, many hours that many of us don't even realize, and he has given us great leadership. We certainly have done some tremendous things over his tenure in his last 2 years, and we have a small token to give to him. And we brought a book that I think Ted has will appreciate, and there is an inscription by the author that is dedicated to Ted.
Yes, this is my last function, which is it's good news, bad news. The good news is that it's all over, and I guess that's the bad news too. I've been on the board for 6 years, and I've enjoyed mostly. Really, what's made it all possible is the support of other people, and I really appreciate that. And I'm sure as we go into the years down the road that the leadership and support of the members will continue to the new officers. So thank you very much. Great. Yes.
I'd like to now introduce our main speaker of the evening and tell you just a few things about him. Oliver Hamlin, as he likes to be called, was born in Oakland, attended schools in Piedmont, graduated in the class of 1938 from Piedmont High School, attended Stanford University in the class of 1942. He then went on into the Navy, served 4 years in World War II on a destroyer in the Pacific. He married Virginia Sayer of Virginia in Oakland, graduated from the University of Berkeley with an MBA in 1947, worked in the Bay Area for several years in sales work, and finally, in 1950, he came to Lafayette. He had known Lafayette for many years before this, but he built his home in 1950 on awful Jonas Hill Road. He's raised his children in the Lafayette School. He's maintained an office. He's a realtor here in the city of Lafayette for over 22 years. It's our pleasure to hear from Ollie Hamlin.
Thank you, Dick, very much. I'm going to try. I'm going to turn the recorder on, if I may, because I'm going to turn the recorder on, if I may. We had another occasion with my father when we had a 100-year ceremony, and we had photographs and a good time. But I always wished that we had had a tape recording of what he had said. So, if you don't mind, I'm going to turn the recorder on. In the last 2 weeks or so, since Dick asked me to make a talk, I really had a good time. It had spurred me on to dig into some old files, and even though I was familiar with the history of the Hamlin property and so forth, it takes an occasion like this to dig a little deeper. And I've learned more details in the last 2 weeks than I have in a long time here. I ran across a file cabinet from my father labeled Old Real Estate Files. And among other things, I ran across the original deed here, handwritten deed of the property here that was purchased by my great-grandfather, that's my grandfather's father, in 1871 from John Pearson and his wife Jenny. It's a handwritten document. It's really a beautiful specimen in itself. But one of the interesting things about the property was that it was a portion of the Rancho Acalanes and also a portion of the Rancho Colorados. So when you get around to describing all those things in the old days, it takes 2 pages of description to describe this property. And they had some very colorful language in the old days. That I might just mention a few. My wife was kind enough to type this out because this handwritten document is kind of hard to read. But it goes back to the grant, the land grant from the Mexican government to Juan Bernal and Joaquin Moraga, containing 3 square leagues of land. And the interest conveyed here was 200 acres for $3,000. That in itself sounds like a pretty good deal, but when you read on, it says, together with the improvements now on said rancho, placed there by Seth Swain, S-W-A-I-N, and people after him, and also a portion of the Rancho Acalanes, and they go on to describe in terms of chains and lengths, so many degrees one way or the other. And the colorful thing is that beginning at that certain stake in the garden of John Pearson, who was the fellow that sold the property, formerly J.E. Stevens, formerly S.W. Swain garden, then 33 degrees along a fence and 6.8100 chains to a station and so forth, as surveyed by K.W. Taylor, county surveyor in 1864. Then, because it was part of Rancho Acalanes and part of Rancho Colorados, it goes on, and the property was bordered on the north by George Yoakum and Daniel Small. These are all names that are in the history of Lafayette. On the east by Walter Renwick, and on the south by lands of Michael Carroll, and on the west by the county road leading from Lafayette to the Redwoods, and that means Redwood Canyon and the town of Canyon there. This was a main road that just, in the old days, it went straight up where old Jonas Hill Road is now, and years ago that road got too steep and they had to abandon it, and they developed the curvy section that goes up the hill today. And it even goes on to talk about an agreement that John Pearson, the one that sold the property, had with Horace Carpentier, and dated 1868. So the way I understand it, that my great-grandfather, the fellow that bought this property, was pretty much a contemporary of Horace Carpentier, and he's a very famous fellow in history. And my grandfather, who moved out here with his family at the age of about 3. My grandfather was born in 1870, and this property was bought in 1871, and he moved out here at age 3, and they lived for many years here in Lafayette. And he was reading some of this documents in the Historical Society. Jenny Bickerstaff Rosenberg had written a history of Lafayette recently, and I noticed in there that her family's property adjoined our family's property, and they were playmates here. So my grandfather was a contemporary of Jenny Bickerstaff, and the gentleman before that was probably approximately the same age as Horace Carpentier. So anyway, they moved out here and they farmed the land. The original Hamlins came from, they were from French Canada, from Quebec, a little town called Grandine down the St. Lawrence River. He came out as a as a teenager, approximately 15 years old. And during the gold rush days, he came down to Panama, walked across the Isthmus of Panama, and took a ship up to San Francisco. And I've learned that he went to Grass Valley, probably to the gold rush. He had to have his taste of the gold rush like Jim Holliday describes. I've read portions of Jim's book, how people went to the gold rush and not to stay for a long period of time, just to get it out of their system. And they would go there and find whatever they could find and then come back home or settle elsewhere in the West. So he went to Grass Valley for a while, and he came back and bought some land in Oakland area, where Albany is now, near McKeever's Hill, where the racetrack is. And then they moved to Lafayette, and my grandfather went to the schools in Lafayette, and eventually went to a school called St. Joseph's Academy in Oakland. Rode his horse in, as I understand, most every day into Oakland, back again, and later on in his when he went to medical school, he would take the horse in for the week and stay and go to San Francisco on the ferry boat, I guess, and come back on Friday. So he was a country boy, and he had a love of horses, and eventually that was showed where he had an interest in this Lafayette Horse Show that was on the family property. There's one, I have to read a passage here from Dorothy Mutnick's book here. I had so much fun going through this book, and I just have to congratulate her on all her research that she's done. But there's a slip here from the Contra Costa Gazette, 1860, where this same property that my great-grandfather bought was for sale in 1860. And I'm quoting here, "A desirable farm near Brown's Mill, Lafayette, Contra Costa County, is offered for sale. It contains 160 acres. That was probably the part that was in one of the ranchos, not both of them. All fenced with a stream of water running through the premises. A new cottage house containing 6 rooms, all lath and plastered. A good barn, 40 by 60. Also a fine orchard of cherry, plum, peach, apple, all in bearing. For further particulars, inquire Henry Klassen on the premises." Well, Henry Klassen, I've learned here, was a son-in-law of Seth Swain, who built the house. So when you consider that he bought the 200 acres plus one of the best houses in the area for $3,000, that was a pretty good value. So eventually I learned in this also book that the house burned down in about 1895, a complete loss when they were from a faulty flue in the house, and they rebuilt the house, probably not as well as what the original house was. But they were farmers, and they prospered off the land. And in about 1991, the wife died, the original Oliver Hamlin, and they moved back to Oakland. But my grandfather got married and became a doctor in Oakland and was active there. But he always had a very fond memory of Lafayette growing up. And in the early 20s, he started to come back pretty regularly and developed what he called the cabin site here on part of the old property. In the meantime, they had leased the property out to family Joe Machado. Maybe some of the people here would remember the dairy. They ran cattle, and then eventually they started a dairy for 15 years called the Alton Crest Dairy. And when I was growing up in the 20s, remember the Machado family and all the children. I think I had 8 children in this house of about 1,000 square feet. I can remember Cecilia and Teresa and Francis and Tony and Agnes and Mary and Joey and Sophie. That's pretty good. When I would come out as a city boy, we'd come out and we would learn how to ride a horse and learn how to milk a cow and learn how to drive a car. In those days, we called it the flat, where Silver Springs is now, and you'd put the car in gear and go. There was nothing in the way. So that made it pretty easy to learn how to drive a car. And my grandfather was a sportsman. He would have rifle ranges and trap shooting, and there was just nothing in the way to get to bother his activities. So they had this cabin up there, the old cabin site. Someone tonight mentioned the electric lanterns. They were these cast iron lanterns that came from Lake Merritt in Oakland when Lake Merritt had the old gas lanterns. And back in the 20s, I guess, when they electrified the Lake Merritt, why somehow or other he got a hold of many of these old cast iron lanterns, and he had a friend that was an electrician, and all the way he had these gas lanterns leading up to his cabin site, which added a lot of flavor. And, so that was in the 20s. In the 30s, I kept coming out here with my father and my grandfather, and about 1940, my father decided that he wanted to build a house. They'd lived in Piedmont all these years, and so he talked to a friend of his named Bill Barnes, who was the head of the Moraga Company for many years. So he had 200 acres of land to build a house on. And so he asked Bill Barnes, his friend, well, you know, if you had all this land, where would you select a home site, you know? And so he told him, well, if I were you, I would build a house up on top of the hill and get the best view that you could find. And I think about that same time, the Hearst Ranch had opened up, and my father had an opportunity to go down to San Simeon. If any of you have been there, you realize it's this beautiful place up on top of a hill with a big commanding view. So that convinced him that he would like to build a house on top of the hill. And he called it Sky High, and it's still called Sky High. So he built his home in 1940. And by that time, I was in college, and my sister had married to Albert Ruhl at that time. So they built an adult house. It spread, the house was a very nice home and spread all over the hillside, but it didn't have very many bedrooms. It was built as an adult home, and so I knew that when I was in college, and then the war came along, and the gasoline was a problem, and so after the war started, he had to move back into Oakland, and he lived in grandfather's home there on Lenox Avenue near Lake Merritt. And he leased the house to some Pan American flyers. There was several of them. They were never all there at the same time, so it was a nice arrangement. And all during the war years, I think the home was leased to the Pan American Flyers. So I came back from the service, and after my grandfather died, I think it was 1943, I was overseas, and my father got the idea that he should start to subdivide some of the land. And so in 1944, they got together with a real estate fellow named Fred Wood in Oakland, and they worked up a subdivision plan, and they started to put their name on the community. It's called Lafayette Homelands there, starting on Moraga Road and St. Mary's Road. And there is a Hamlin Road, and there's an Oliver Court, and there's a rural place named after my sister's family. And one interesting thing was that when they started to work up this brochure, trying to describe people from Oakland to find this property in Lafayette, they found that the main street had several names. If you remember, from Mount Diablo Boulevard to about St. Mary's Road, it was called Commercial Street. And then from then on, it was called Jonah Hill Road. And then there was an old Jonah Hill. Somehow, I don't know how the Jonah Hill got into Jonas Hill, but there were several names, and it was confusing to describe. So my father got a petition of the property owners, and between Lafayette and up about where Ream is, and petitioned to Jack Cummings, the supervisor there, that they should change the name of the road to Moraga Road. So he was able to do that. Imagine how difficult that might be today to get all the property owners to agree on changing the name of the road. But he was able to do that. So the lot sold pretty quickly, and they went from Unit 1 to Unit 2. That was 1944 and 45. And then I had talked my father into carving out a nice knoll that I had always remembered as a boy. And so we decided Virginia and I decided to build a house in 1950 on this knoll. And at that time, Lafayette was growing. I can remember the school board was looking for a site for the present Stanley School, the intermediate school. And they contacted us, and we went to 2 or 3 school board meetings. I can remember M.H. Stanley and Elizabeth Freeman and others. They were interested in either our property or the Giglione property where they finally settled. And I think they ended up paying twice as much or something per acre for the Giglione property. But Elizabeth Freeman finally explained that they had a creek on our property, and they were worried about the problems of the drainage in the creek, so they settled on the present site where Stanley School is now. So the school board was happy, and we were happy, and so then in 1953, Jack Marchant came along, and the city was growing, and my father worked out and sold him 41 acres, I think were for the site of Silver Springs now. And it turned into 65 home sites and 65 homes. Another 10 years later, 1963, my father sold some more property to Jack Marchant on the upper end of Old Jonas Hill Road. I think it was 11 acres and 13 sites. And then in 1973, my father decided it was time that he should sell his home up on Sky High. So they did sell the home and 48 acres that went along with it to Steckel Development and Fidelity Savings. And at that time, he moved back into to Piedmont here. And actually, he died at the end of late in December in 1973. So I don't think that my father really had that plan in mind, kind of a 10-year plan to sell some of the land and keep the balance and every 10 years, but that's kind of the way it worked out. And it's probably a better plan if you're thinking about it rather than selling the whole ranch out at one time. Now, one thing I have to talk about is there's a picture on the wall over there where we had, in 1971, I had never seen the original document, but I've seen copies of it, that we decided that we ought to have a 100-year ceremony, 1871 to 1971, and so we decided, I talked my father into the fact that we ought to buy a brass plaque. We never had a brass plaque, and so we decided, I was on Easter Sunday at my home there on Old Jonas Hill Road, and we gathered the family together, and we dedicated the brass plaque, which is at the base of the flagpole that I have in my home. And It was, if you can read the inscription, it says this commemorates 100 years of the property being in the Hamlin family, and it's dedicated to the 5 generations of Hamlins who have lived on the land. So even the flagpole that we have in our yard, I personally moved from the old cabin site up on the hills down to the present site where it is on my lawn. There's one other interesting thing that as a real estate person, I'm interested in documents and survey stakes and corner stakes. For years, this barbed wire fence on the eastern end of the property has been there. In the old days, the cattle ate up the shrubbery so that you could get a line of sight without any problem in a straight line, but now Mother Nature takes over and there's just any number of trees and shrubs and you couldn't see 10 feet. And I really got a kick out of that. It's still there, and I cut the grass away so that we can see that orange flag on the survey stake. So as I look back, I was a city boy, but I do have fond memories of growing up in Lafayette, and I learned how to milk a cow, I learned how to drive a car, I learned how to shoot a gun and ride a horse, and I can't think of a better place to live than we're here to stay. Thank you.
In your research, do you have any idea how your great-grandfather financed the purchase of the $3,000? Equivalent to $300,000 now. Did he borrow mortgages, or do you know? Or do you
Well, as far as I know, he paid for it, and he probably sold the land that he had in Oakland. He had a farm in Albany area, and he probably sold that and bought this one.
So it was a cash transaction.
I imagine. I was never been able to find any mortgages involved.
Well, I ask because there's so many of these historical things you read about. Original John Marsh, he comes out here and buys a piece of property. You often wonder what he bought it with, whether he's acting around with the belt.
Well, in this case, I guess he sold something else.
A few openings for the trip to Sacramento, if any of you would like to sign up. The list is over here. So we'd like to fill up the bus, and if any of you would like to go, we'd be happy to have you join us.
What is the date of that again?
Saturday, October 6th.
I think I'd like to do that.
Good. Now Holly's going to come with us. We'd like to have all of you. We could have 2 buses easily. Any other questions?
What's the date, Dick? Saturday, what?
Saturday. I think it's been a very delightful evening. We look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.